In the quiet of a shared dorm room, Taylor found a note tucked under his pillow. It read, "Meet me at the old oak tree by the lake at midnight. T." His heart pounded as he wondered who T could be and what this mysterious note meant. Taylor sat on the edge of his bed, the note crumpled in his hand. The room was dimly lit, the only sound the soft hum of the old air conditioner. He had been at the university for a week, and so far, his experience had been uneventful. He had met a few people, but nothing had stood out. Until now. The note was written in a neat, elegant script, the kind that suggested someone had taken their time to craft each letter. Taylor's mind raced with possibilities. Who could T be, and why the old oak tree by the lake? It was a secluded spot, known more for its eerie atmosphere than its romantic allure. He glanced at the clock. It was already 11:30 p.m. If he was going to meet whoever T was, he needed to hurry. He quickly changed into a pair of jeans and a hoodie, grabbed his jacket, and slipped out of the room, leaving the door slightly ajar. The campus was eerily quiet at this hour. The usual chatter and laughter of students had been replaced by the distant hum of the city. Taylor walked briskly, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't shake the feeling of suspense, the unknown adding a thrill to his steps. As he approached the old oak tree, he saw a figure standing under its gnarled branches. The figure was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark jacket and jeans. Taylor's heart skipped a beat as he realized it was Tom, his roommate. Tom turned as Taylor approached, his face illuminated by the faint glow of the moon. "You came," Tom said, his voice soft but steady. Taylor nodded, his breath catching in his throat. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Tom smiled, a slow, gentle smile that seemed to light up the darkness. "I'm Tom," he said, "your roommate, and I think we need to talk." Taylor's mind was a whirlwind of questions. Why the secrecy? Why the note? And why now? But as he looked into Tom's eyes, he felt a strange sense of calm. Whatever was about to happen, he was ready to face it. Tom took a deep breath, his eyes never leaving Taylor's. "I've been watching you, Taylor," he said, "and I think I'm falling for you." Taylor's heart pounded in his chest. He had never expected this, never even considered the possibility. But as he stood there, under the old oak tree, he felt a connection, a bond that he couldn't ignore. "Tom," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. I don't know what to say." Tom reached out, his hand gently cupping Taylor's cheek. "You don't have to say anything," he said. "Just know that I'm here for you, and I want to be a part of your life." Taylor felt a tear slip down his cheek. He had never felt so vulnerable, so exposed. But he also felt a sense of peace, a sense of belonging. He reached up, his hand covering Tom's, and nodded. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay." As they stood there, under the old oak tree, the world around them seemed to fade away. It was just the two of them, their hearts beating in sync, their souls intertwined. And in that moment, Taylor knew that his life would never be the same. Taylor's heart raced as he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Tom's confession echoed in his mind, and he couldn't shake the feeling of both excitement and fear that gripped him. He knew one thing for certain. He couldn't ignore the spark he felt with Tom. The next morning, Taylor woke up to the soft hum of the dormitory coming to life. He had barely slept, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. Tom's confession had left him reeling, and he wasn't sure how to process it. He looked over at Tom, who was still asleep, his chest rising and falling with each breath. Taylor felt a pang of guilt for not being able to reciprocate the same level of certainty. He quietly got out of bed and headed to the communal bathroom. The cold water on his face helped to clear his mind, but the questions remained. What did he want? Could he see himself with Tom? The uncertainty weighed heavily on him. As he returned to the room, Tom was awake, sitting on the edge of his bed. "Morning," Tom said, his voice soft and gentle. Taylor nodded, avoiding eye contact. "Hey," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. Tom stood up and walked over to Taylor, his eyes filled with a mix of hope and apprehension. "Taylor, about last night," he started, but Taylor cut him off. "I need some time, Tom," Taylor said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need to sort out my feelings." Tom's face fell, but he nodded understandingly. "Of course," he said. "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." Taylor felt a wave of relief wash over him. He knew Tom was being patient, and it meant a lot. But he also knew he had to figure out his own feelings before he could give Tom an answer. The day passed in a blur. Taylor attended his classes, but his mind was elsewhere. He couldn't focus on his lectures or his notes. All he could think about was Tom and the confession that had changed everything. As the day wore on, Taylor found himself wandering the campus, lost in thought. He ended up at the old oak tree by the lake, the same spot where Tom had confessed his feelings. He sat down under the tree, the cool breeze rustling the leaves above him. He thought about his life, about the people he had known and the experiences he had had. He thought about his dreams and his fears. And he thought about Tom. The more he thought, the more he realized that his feelings for Tom were deeper than he had initially allowed himself to admit. He remembered the small moments they had shared, laughing over silly jokes, studying together late into the night, the way Tom's eyes lit up when he talked about something he was passionate about. These moments had all added up to something more significant than he had realized. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the lake, Taylor made his decision. He stood up, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew what he had to do. He walked back to the dormitory, his steps steady and sure. When he entered the room, Tom was there, sitting on his bed, a book open in his lap. He looked up as Taylor entered, his eyes filled with a mix of hope and fear. "Tom," Taylor said, his voice steady and sure, "I've made my decision." Tom put down his book, his eyes never leaving Taylor's. "And what is it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Taylor took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. "I want to be with you, Tom," he said. "I want to see where this goes." Tom's face lit up with a smile, and he stood up, walking over to Taylor. He reached out, his hand gently cupping Taylor's cheek. "I'm so glad to hear that," he said, his voice filled with emotion. Taylor leaned into the touch, feeling a sense of peace and belonging. He knew the road ahead would not be easy, but he was ready to face it with Tom by his side. As they stood there under the soft glow of the dorm room light, they shared a kiss, a promise of the future they were about to build together. The uncertainty was still there, but it was overshadowed by the love and hope that filled their hearts. As Taylor and Tom navigated their newfound relationship, they found solace in the quiet moments they shared. But the world outside their dorm room was far from understanding, and they soon realized that their love would face challenges they had never imagined. The first few weeks of Taylor and Tom's relationship were a whirlwind of emotions. They spent every moment they could together, exploring each other's minds and hearts. They laughed, they talked, and they shared secrets that had been buried deep within. It felt like a dream come true, a perfect bubble of happiness that they never wanted to burst. However, as the days turned into weeks, they began to notice the subtle changes in the atmosphere around them, whispers in the hallways, sideways glances, and the occasional snide remark from fellow students. It was clear that not everyone was accepting of their relationship. One evening, as they walked back from the library, Taylor felt a sudden chill run down his spine. He turned to see a group of students staring at them, their expressions a mix of curiosity and disdain. Tom, noticing Taylor's discomfort, squeezed his hand reassuringly. "Don't let it bother you," Tom whispered, his voice steady and calm. "We know who we are, and that's what matters." Taylor nodded, but the incident left a lingering sense of unease. He couldn't help but wonder if their relationship was worth the scrutiny and judgment they were facing. The next day, during one of their classes, Taylor felt a piece of paper land on his desk. He picked it up, his heart sinking as he read the hateful words scrawled across it. "Faggots belong in hell," it read, the letters crude and angry. He looked around the room, but no one seemed to notice his distress. Tom, sitting a few rows away, noticed the change in Taylor's demeanor. He excused himself from his seat and made his way over to Taylor, his eyes filled with concern. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice low. Taylor handed him the note, his hands trembling. Tom's face darkened as he read the words, his jaw clenching in anger. "We need to report this," he said, his voice firm. Taylor shook his head, his eyes welling up with tears. "And what good will that do?" he asked, his voice choked with emotion. "They'll just find another way to hurt us." Tom's heart ached for Taylor, seeing the pain and fear in his eyes. He knew that this was just the beginning of the challenges they would face, but he was determined to stand by Taylor's side, no matter what. That night, as they lay in bed, Taylor's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. He couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability and fear that had settled over him. He turned to Tom, his eyes searching for comfort. "Tom," he whispered, his voice trembling. "What if this gets worse? What if people start to hate us even more?" Tom pulled Taylor close, his arms wrapping around him protectively. "Then we'll face it together," he said, his voice steady and sure. "We'll stand strong and we'll show them that love is love, no matter what." Taylor felt a sense of peace wash over him as he listened to Tom's words. He knew that Tom was right, that they had to stand together, no matter what challenges came their way. But as the days turned into weeks, the challenges only seemed to grow. They faced more hateful notes, more whispered comments, and even a few physical altercations. Each time Tom was there, standing by Taylor's side, his strength and support unwavering. One evening, as they walked back from a movie, they were cornered by a group of students. The leader, a tall and muscular guy, stepped forward, his eyes filled with malice. "Look what we have here," he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "The campus faggots." Taylor's heart pounded in his chest, but he stood his ground, his hand tightly gripping Tom's. Tom, on the other hand, stepped forward, his voice steady and calm. "We're not afraid of you," he said, his eyes never leaving the leaders. "And we won't let you or anyone else dictate how we live our lives." The leader's face darkened, and he took a step forward, his fist clenched. But before he could make a move, Tom stepped in front of Taylor, his body shielding him from the impending threat. "Touch him, and you'll have to deal with me," Tom said, his voice firm and unyielding. The leader hesitated, his eyes flickering with uncertainty. He knew that Tom was serious, and he knew that he couldn't back down without losing face. But he also knew that he couldn't risk getting into a fight with someone who was clearly willing to stand his ground. After a moment of tense silence, the leader finally stepped back, his eyes filled with frustration. "You're pathetic," he spat, before turning and walking away, his group of followers trailing behind him. As they walked away, Taylor's heart was pounding in his chest. He turned to Tom, his eyes filled with gratitude and love. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. Tom smiled, his hand reaching out to squeeze Taylor's. "We're in this together," he said, "and we'll face whatever comes our way, side by side." As they made their way back to the dormitory, Taylor felt a sense of pride and strength. He knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but he also knew that with Tom by his side, he could face anything. Their love was a beacon of hope in the darkness, a light that would guide them through the toughest of times. And as they stood together, hand in hand, they knew that nothing could break the bond they shared. As the semester progressed, Taylor and Tom found solace in each other's company, but the weight of their secret began to take a toll. They yearned for a place where they could be themselves without fear or judgment, a place where their love could bloom freely. The days turned into months, and Taylor and Tom's relationship deepened. They found comfort in each other's presence, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. However, the constant scrutiny and judgment from their peers weighed heavily on them. They longed for a place where they could be themselves without the fear of being judged or hated. One afternoon, as they sat in the campus cafe, Taylor looked around at the other students. He saw couples holding hands, laughing, and enjoying each other's company without a care in the world. He felt a pang of envy, wishing they could have the same freedom. "Tom," Taylor said, his voice soft but filled with longing, "do you ever wish we could just be normal?" Tom looked at him, his eyes filled with understanding. "All the time," he admitted. "But we are normal, Taylor. Our love is just as valid as anyone else's." Taylor sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I know," he said, "but it's hard sometimes. It's hard to feel like we have to hide who we are, to be afraid of what people might think or say." Tom reached across the table, his hand covering Taylor's. "I know it's hard," he said. "But we can't let fear control our lives. We have to find a way to be true to ourselves, no matter what." Taylor nodded, feeling a sense of determination wash over him. He knew Tom was right. They couldn't let the fear of judgment hold them back from living their lives to the fullest. Over the next few weeks, Taylor and Tom began to search for a place where they could be themselves. They joined a few campus clubs, hoping to find a community that would accept them for who they were. They tried the LGBTQ+ student group, but it felt too formal and structured. They attended a few meetings of the art club, but it didn't quite fit either. One day, while walking through the campus bookstore, Taylor noticed a flyer for a local community center. The flyer advertised a support group for LGBTQ+ individuals and their allies. It promised a safe and welcoming space where people could be themselves without fear of judgment. Taylor's heart leaped with hope. He showed the flyer to Tom, who nodded enthusiastically. "Let's go," Tom said, his eyes shining with excitement. The next evening, they made their way to the community center. The building was old but welcoming, with colorful murals adorning the walls and a warm, inviting atmosphere. As they entered the support group meeting, they were greeted by a diverse group of people, all smiling and friendly. The group leader, a kind-faced woman named Lisa, welcomed them warmly. "We're so glad you're here," she said, her voice gentle and reassuring. "This is a safe space for everyone to be themselves and share their experiences." Taylor and Tom sat down, feeling a sense of relief wash over them. For the first time in a long time, they felt like they could breathe, like they could be themselves without the constant fear of judgment. As the meeting progressed, they listened to the stories of others, their hearts aching with empathy and understanding. They shared their own experiences, finding solace in the shared struggles and triumphs. By the end of the night, they felt a sense of belonging, a sense of community that they had been longing for. Over the following weeks, Taylor and Tom became regulars at the support group meetings. They found comfort in the shared experiences and the unconditional acceptance they received. They made new friends, people who understood their struggles and supported them without judgment. One evening, as they walked back from the community center, Taylor turned to Tom, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," he said, his voice choked with emotion, "for finding this place, for being by my side through everything." Tom smiled, his hand reaching out to squeeze Taylor's. "We're in this together," he said, "and we'll find our way no matter what?" As they walked hand in hand, the weight of their secret began to lift. They knew that the road ahead would still be challenging, but they also knew that they had found a place where they could be themselves, where they could love freely and without fear. The community center became their sanctuary, a place where they could escape the judgment and hatred of the world outside. It was a place of healing, of growth, and of love. And as they stood together, hand in hand, they knew that they had found something precious, something that would sustain them through the toughest of times. But even as they found solace in their newfound community, they knew that the world outside was far from accepting. And as they prepared to face the challenges that lay ahead, they knew that their love would be tested in ways they had never imagined. Little did they know, a storm was brewing on the horizon, one that would test the very foundations of their relationship and their newfound sense of belonging. Just as Taylor and Tom began to find their footing in a world that seemed to accept them, a sudden and shocking event threatened to tear their newfound peace apart. The storm they had feared was about to hit, and it would test the very limits of their love and resilience. The weeks that followed were some of the happiest Taylor and Tom had experienced together. The support group at the community center had become their sanctuary, a place where they could be themselves without fear or judgment. They had made new friends, found a sense of belonging, and their love had deepened in ways they had never imagined. However, as they walked back from a particularly uplifting meeting one evening, they noticed an unusual commotion on campus. Groups of students were huddled together, whispering and pointing towards the student union building. An eerie silence hung in the air, broken only by the occasional murmur of concern. Taylor and Tom exchanged a worried glance and quickened their pace towards the building. As they approached, they saw a crowd gathered around a large notice board. The air was thick with tension, and the whispers grew louder as they pushed their way through the crowd. What they saw made their hearts sink. Pinned to the notice board was a series of hateful flyers, each one more vile than the last. The words "faggots stay out" and "normal people only" were scrawled in bold, angry letters. Below them were crude drawings and derogatory comments aimed at the LGBTQ+ community. Taylor's stomach churned as he read the hateful words. He felt a wave of nausea and anger wash over him. Tom, seeing his distress, pulled him close, his arm wrapping protectively around his shoulders. "This is sickening," Tom muttered, his voice filled with disgust. "Who could do something like this?" The crowd around them began to murmur in agreement, but there were also a few voices of dissent, whispering words of support for the hateful messages. Taylor felt a chill run down his spine as he heard the venom in their voices. Suddenly, a familiar face emerged from the crowd. It was one of their classmates, a guy named Jake, who had always been friendly but had never shown any particular support for their relationship. He looked at Taylor and Tom, his eyes filled with a mix of pity and anger. "Hey, guys," Jake said, his voice low. "I'm so sorry about this. Some people just don't get it." Taylor nodded, grateful for the support. "Thanks, Jake," he said, his voice shaky. "It means a lot." As they stood there, surrounded by the hateful messages, Taylor and Tom felt a sense of dread wash over them. They knew that this was just the beginning, that the storm they had feared was finally here. Over the next few days, the campus was in turmoil. The administration condemned the hateful flyers, but the damage had already been done. The atmosphere was charged with tension, and the whispers and stares had intensified. Taylor and Tom felt the weight of the judgment and hatred pressing down on them, making it hard to breathe. One evening, as they sat in their dorm room, Taylor's phone buzzed with a message. He picked it up, his heart sinking as he read the words. It was a threat, a hateful message telling them to stay away from each other or face the consequences. Tom, seeing the look on Taylor's face, took the phone from him and read the message. His face darkened with anger, and he clenched his fist. In frustration, "This has to stop," he said, his voice firm. "We can't live like this. Always looking over our shoulders. Always afraid." Taylor nodded, his eyes filled with tears. "I know," he said. "But what can we do? We can't fight everyone." Tom's expression softened, and he pulled Taylor into a tight embrace. "We don't have to fight everyone," he said, "but we have to stand up for ourselves. We have to show them that we won't be intimidated, that we won't be silenced." Over the next few days, Taylor and Tom began to fight back. They reported the threats to the campus security, who assured them that they were taking the matter seriously. They also reached out to the support group at the community center, who offered them additional support and resources. But the most important thing they did was to stand together, to show the world that they were not afraid, that they would not be silenced. They held hands in the hallways, walked together to classes, and even attended a few campus events, their heads held high and their chins held firm. One evening, as they walked back from a particularly challenging day, they were approached by a group of students. The leader, a tall and muscular guy, stepped forward, his eyes filled with malice. "Look what we have here," he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "The campus faggots." Taylor's heart pounded in his chest, but he stood his ground, his hand tightly gripping Tom's. Tom, on the other hand, stepped forward, his voice steady and calm. "We're not afraid of you," he said, his eyes never leaving the leaders. "And we won't let you or anyone else dictate how we live our lives." The leader's face darkened, and he took a step forward, his fist clenched. But before he could make a move, Tom stepped in front of Taylor, his body shielding him from the impending threat. "Touch him, and you'll have to deal with me," Tom said, his voice firm and unyielding. The leader hesitated, his eyes flickering with uncertainty. He knew that Tom was serious, and he knew that he couldn't back down without losing face. But he also knew that he couldn't risk getting into a fight with someone who was clearly willing to stand his ground. After a moment of tense silence, the leader finally stepped back, his eyes filled with frustration. "You're pathetic," he spat, before turning and walking away, his group of followers trailing behind him. As they walked away, Taylor's heart was pounding in his chest. He turned to Tom, his eyes filled with gratitude and love. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. Tom smiled, his hand reaching out to squeeze Taylor's. "We're in this together," he said, "and we'll face whatever comes our way, side by side." But even as they stood together, hand in hand, they knew that the storm was far from over. The hateful messages and threats continued, and the atmosphere on campus remained charged with tension. They knew that they had to be strong, that they had to stand up for themselves and for each other no matter what. And as they prepared to face the challenges that lay ahead, they knew that their love would be tested in ways they had never imagined. But they also knew that they had found something precious, something that would sustain them through the toughest of times. Their love was a beacon of hope in the darkness, a light that would guide them through the storm and into a brighter future. Little did they know, the storm was about to reach its peak, and they would have to dig deep to find the strength to weather it. As the tension on campus reached a boiling point, Taylor and Tom found themselves at the center of a media storm. Their love story, once a private affair, was now thrust into the public eye, and they had to navigate the complexities of fame, judgment, and the unyielding support of their community. The days that followed were a whirlwind of chaos and uncertainty. The hateful flyers and threats had escalated, and the campus was in a state of turmoil. The administration, under pressure from both students and faculty, had stepped up their efforts to address the issue, but the damage had already been done. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and the whispers and stares had intensified. Taylor and Tom, determined to stand their ground, continued to hold hands in the hallways, walk together to classes, and attend campus events. Their heads were held high, and their chins were firm, but the weight of the judgment and hatred pressed down on them like a heavy blanket. One morning, as they walked to their first class, they were approached by a reporter from the campus newspaper. The reporter, a young woman with a notepad and pen, introduced herself as Emily. "Mind if I ask you a few questions?" she asked, her voice friendly but professional. Taylor and Tom exchanged a glance, unsure of what to expect. "Sure," Tom said, his voice steady. Emily began to ask them about their experiences on campus, about the hateful flyers and the threats they had received. Taylor and Tom answered honestly, their voices filled with a mix of anger and sadness. They talked about the support they had received from the community center and the friends they had made there. As they spoke, Emily's eyes widened with empathy. She took notes, her pen flying across the page. When they finished, she thanked them and promised to write a fair and accurate article. A few days later, the article was published. It was a powerful piece, highlighting the struggles that Taylor and Tom had faced and the support they had received from their community. The article went viral, and suddenly, Taylor and Tom found themselves at the center of a media storm. Reporters from local and national outlets began to contact them, asking for interviews and statements. Taylor and Tom were overwhelmed, but they knew that they had a platform to make a difference. They agreed to a few interviews, using the opportunity to speak out against hate and discrimination. One evening, as they sat in their dorm room, the phone rang. It was a call from a national news station, asking if they would be willing to appear on a live segment to discuss their experiences. Taylor and Tom looked at each other, their hearts pounding with a mix of excitement and fear. "We can do this," Tom said, his voice steady and sure. "We can use this platform to make a difference." Taylor nodded, feeling a sense of determination wash over him. "Let's do it," he said. The next day, they were on a plane to the news station, their hearts pounding with anticipation. As they sat in the studio, the bright lights and cameras pointed at them, they felt a sense of surrealism. They had never imagined that their love story would become a national headline. The interview was intense, but Taylor and Tom held their ground. They spoke honestly about their experiences, about the hate they had faced and the love they had found. They talked about the importance of acceptance and the need for change. As they finished the interview, the host thanked them for their courage and their willingness to speak out. Taylor and Tom felt a sense of pride and accomplishment, knowing that they had used their platform to make a difference. Back on campus, the atmosphere had begun to shift. The hateful flyers and threats had not stopped, but there was a growing sense of support and solidarity. Students, faculty, and even some members of the administration had begun to speak out against the hate, using social media and other platforms to spread a message of love and acceptance. Taylor and Tom were touched by the outpouring of support. They knew that they were not alone, that they had a community of people who stood with them, who believed in them, and who were willing to fight for their rights. One evening, as they walked back from a particularly emotional support group meeting, they were approached by a group of students. The leader, a tall and muscular guy, stepped forward, his eyes filled with malice. "Look what we have here," he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "The campus faggots!" Taylor's heart pounded in his chest, but he stood his ground, his hand tightly gripping Tom's. Tom, on the other hand, stepped forward, his voice steady and calm. "We're not afraid of you," he said, his eyes never leaving the leaders. "And we won't let you or anyone else dictate how we live our lives." The leader's face darkened, and he took a step forward, his fist clenched. But before he could make a move, a group of students stepped forward, their voices filled with anger and determination. "Leave them alone," one of them said, his voice firm. "They have every right to be here, just like the rest of us." The leader hesitated, his eyes flickering with uncertainty. He knew that he was outnumbered, that he could not win this fight. After a moment of tense silence, he finally stepped back, his eyes filled with frustration. "You're pathetic," he spat, before turning and walking away, his group of followers trailing behind him. As they walked away, Taylor and Tom felt a sense of relief and pride. They knew that they had won a battle, but they also knew that the war was far from over. They would continue to face challenges and obstacles, but they would face them together, hand in hand, their love a beacon of hope in the darkness. As they stood there under the soft glow of the campus lights, they knew that they had found something precious, something that would sustain them through the toughest of times. Their love was a testament to their strength and resilience, a light that would guide them through the storm and into a brighter future. And as they looked into each other's eyes, they knew that they were ready to face whatever came their way, together. Their journey had been filled with challenges and obstacles, but it had also been filled with love, support, and a sense of belonging. And as they stood there, hand in hand, they knew that they had found something worth fighting for, something worth cherishing, and something worth sharing with the world. Their love story was far from over, but they were ready to write the next chapter, together.